Welcome, everybody. It's Katie with Ria Health, and I'm back again today with Claudia Christian, fellow medication-assisted treatment advocate, as well as actress and author. And so happy to have you here, Claudia, today because you are going to tell us about really your experience with the medication Naltrexone for treating your own alcohol use disorder. Because as I understand it, you're someone who was on the medication for about 9 years until I think you stopped at the 10th year to really just stop drinking altogether. So I know a lot of people are really curious to hear from those who have been on the treatment long term, with success. So I really just want to dive right in and hand it over to you to really kind of paint a picture for us what it was like for you being on naltrexone, from day one up until the end of year 9. So please take it away.
Okay. Always great to be here, Katie. Thank you. I was sort of the guinea pig, I guess, in the very beginning because I didn't really have anything to compare my journey to. So my side effects, I'll start with that. Just a little bit of spacey feeling and a little sleeplessness for a couple of weeks. I had gone from being a binge drinker to then being a social drinker, which was quite exciting for me. I think I probably would have in the beginning. I was just kind of following my cravings. I think was what I was doing. But my thoughts, I didn't know then about mindfulness or really how to identify if that was a serious craving for alcohol or if it was just the excitement of being able to drink normally like a normal person and having an off button. So I would say I probably drank 2-3 times a week that first year. I didn't have long periods of sobriety, which is probably a good thing because my body got really used to the medication quite quickly, and those few side effects did go away. I'll get back to why that was important, taking it on a regular basis for me in a minute. So the first year, I would say that it was such a joy to feel like my old self. And that was the self that I lost probably in my late 30s. So I would say that for a good, I didn't drink much as a teenager or in my 20s, but for a good 10, 15 years of my life, I had drunk like a normal person. I was a social drinker. So yes, there were times that I drank to excess, like any other 20-year-old who drinks.
Yeah.
I didn't really black out or have any of that kind of thing going on in my life. So I was back to that person. I was back to the person who I was also a little bit paranoid about really doing it correctly. So I was wrong in some regards. For instance, I always thought that, if I didn't drink it exactly 60 minutes, if I didn't drink alcohol 60 minutes after taking the pill, that I was screwing it up. So that led to some inappropriate amounts of stress for me because I would take the pill, leave my house, and then go to a party and they weren't serving alcohol, and I would just be dying inside thinking, oh my God, I'm going to die. I'm going to fall back into a binge drinker. I really was. So I was out of my mind with concern, which I wish I would have actually stayed that way for my entire, near decade experience on naltrexone, but I didn't. But that paranoia, I wish somebody would have told me, no, it's okay. You drink have a drink when you get home, or you're covered for at least a few hours.
It doesn't need to be precisely exactly an hour or
precisely
everything.
60 minutes. And it's interesting because I remember I think it was pretty much in the beginning. Maybe it was in I don't know which year it was, but I went to France and I was studying French, and I was in Sinclair at this French school, and I was in fastidious mode about TSM, and I brought my pills, and I was, and I remember that I didn't drink until I knew we were going to have this wine tasting outing as a class, and I was so excited that I could participate because normally when I was a binge drinker or sober, I would never, attend a wine tasting thing. But that was another incident where I go to the wine tasting thing and I didn't realize I had popped the pill, and 2 hours into it, they're still teaching. We're not drinking. And so so finally the teacher came up to me and said, "Why do you look so stressed out, Claudia?" And I told him, I said, I'm on this treatment for alcoholism. That's what we called it there. And I have to drink an hour after taking the medication, and there's no wine. There's no wine. I thought there'd be wine. And I was crying.
God.
I was so upset. I was like, and he looked at me like I was an absolute weirdo. Like, I mean, he had, of course, never heard of this. And of course I was wrong. I could have, been fine until we had the wine. And about an hour later, we did have the wine, and I had a glass of wine. I had a couple tastes, maybe from, 6 different ones, which were that big. So I
Yeah.
probably had a half a glass of wine, but I was so relieved that nothing bad happened to me. So that's how scared I was in the beginning.
Wow.
And fear is a good thing in the beginning of your TSM journey, because I want people to be scared. I want them to treat this as if it's their statin or their insulin. I really, really want to put the fear of God into them, because it's true. When you don't comply, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
So I would say year 1 was super cautious, definitely stockpiling pills everywhere. I think at one point I even sort of double dipped with doctors, because I wanted to have some in England and some in America and some with my boyfriends and some with my, mom. And, it's seriously, I was ridiculously paranoid about it. So I think I think I was, you can't do that anymore. But back in the day, I'd ask my one doctor for the pills, asked my other doctor for a prescription. And these are not, this is not a medication that you can abuse, but I was treating it like it was,
It's your life-saving medication.
It was my life-saving medication, and I wanted to have it everywhere. I wanted to have excess pills. So year 1 was wonderful. Year 2, I really was great. I remember I went to Italy with my boyfriend at the time, who had lived through a lot of my horrific binges. And we had a great time, and everybody was drinking during the day, and I didn't. I only drank at night, and I was the driver, the designated driver, which was just so amazing. And I remembered the whole trip, and I just had all these really intense, great memories of when I complied perfectly on TSM. Year 3 was also excellent. It was really a year when I decided to make my movie and write the book about TSM. And so all of this stuff happened from 2009. 2010, I started my advocacy, obviously. And then I started planning on writing Babylon Confidential. And then I did the movie, One Little Pill. And then in year 4, I started to get a little bit lazy. And that was, I remember the very first time I didn't comply, and it was just, I was out with friends, and I didn't intend to drink. And then everybody was drinking, and I just went, oh, I'll just take the pill with the wine. And I knew better. I didn't go into a binge, but I definitely started getting a little lazy about compliance. And that taught me something really important. When your body is used to the naltrexone and used to drinking on naltrexone, Dr. Stephen Cox describes it as the medication sitting behind your brain. So it's almost like it's sitting in the background of your brain. So that means that you are tolerating the medication, your body is in sync with the medication, everything's working great, you don't have side effects. This is not the time to screw it up. So what I did by screwing it up is I had to almost get used to it again. Because so what I would do is, I was fudging a little bit, and then I wouldn't drink for many months. And because I had fudged the last time, I kind of had to start TSM over again.
Interesting.
Yeah, and that's why I'm so on people and so adamant about compliance, because it is that important. I got back on it, and I was once again successful on it. Year 5 and 6 and 7 was my year that I had the grand Poobah relapse of all time, and that was I have to give a little background for this. I was not taking care of myself. I was obsessed with saving people on TSM. My whole life was TSM. I had gone from having a very creative career to having a career full of addiction and sadness and death and heartbreak, and really struggling to be there for people 24 hours a day.
And you were responding to emails and coaching people for free for a really long time. Yeah.
For free, not only for free, but giving people my home number, my cell phone number, my, getting texts in the middle of the night, getting phone calls on my landline. I mean, it was not healthy. And I was still trying to, of course, build C3 Foundation and try to get money into C3 Foundation. And I wasn't acting as much, so I wasn't making money, and it was just, so I had to do conventions. And so this brings me to the whole relapse thing. Is I was burnt out, and I had not been well. I started having, like colds and things like that. And I decided that I would go do this convention in England. And it was like the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back. I found out from Dr. Escapa. I kind of had this feeling that I should talk to Dr. Sinclair, and he said I should call him right then, and I did. And Dr. Sinclair died, and that sent me, ironically, of course, and painfully to admit, it sent me straight down to the bar without taking naltrexone.
Yeah.
And that was my, I'm human, but it's something I, of course, regret, and it's embarrassing and shameful and everything you can say about it. But I learned something extraordinary, and that is that even a person who is the face of this method, even the person who is probably the most recognized advocate of this method, can screw up.
Yeah.
And that I think, once again, going back to my never ending, hitting it home with every single person I coach, every single person I speak to, is compliance, 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 compliance. I cannot state it more than I already do. It unequivocally, it is the most paramount, most important aspect of the Sinclair Method. It will not work unless you comply. And so many people start out so excited, and they're so fastidious about it, and they're so good about compliance, and then they just start petering out. And I can see it from hindsight. I've been there. So of course, I don't want to let them slip down that slippery road, because thank God I survived. I mean, I survived. Yeah. And by, year 8, I just decided to drink a lot less. And because when I was taking naltrexone, I could feel the effects more. I started going through, perimenopause, that kind of thing. Hormonally, I was all over the place. And by 2018, I had just said, you know what, I've done it. I no longer had that little voice in my head that said, well, I have to prove that I can drink on naltrexone. And I think just eliminating that, my goal had been satisfied. My goal was to become a normal drinker, and I did that, and I proved that can work. And then I felt, you know what, you've proven that a few times throughout your journey, you weren't responsible. So it wasn't like I was saying to myself, you don't deserve to drink. What I was saying was, you used that as a tool to reach where you should be, which is abstinent by choice, abstinent without cravings, abstinent without the desire for alcohol. And I've said it before, if 10 years from now, suddenly I feel like having a glass of wine, I know I could take naltrexone again.
Yeah.
And that's totally fine for me. But right now, and for the past, since the end of 2018, when I went abstinent in October, November, whatever it was, I don't want it.
Yeah.
So it's the journey has been so interesting, but it's been an awful long time. I mean, it's been a really long time. But to go from somebody who was so paranoid about non-compliance and so fastidious about it, to somebody who, by 4 years in, was sort of like, oh, I'm cured. And that is the thing. That's the thing that I always tell people. You're not. You're in remission. And this is another reason why we always I in particular thought we should change the title of Roy's book, because it's the word cure is almost misleading in a way, because you're not cured. It's asleep. I always say, the monster's asleep. The dragon in your mind is asleep. The addict is in your brain is asleep, but it's not dead. It's not eliminated. It's asleep. And so as long as you view yourself as being in remission, so as long as you say, okay, this is in remission, the second you don't comply, you're going to have it full blown again, maybe even worse. I'll tell you that much also from experience, that I relearned the addictive behavior so quickly it would make your mind spin. I mean, in that binge in year 7, I went from a couple of drinks unprotected to a full-blown binge within a few days.
Wow.
So I don't want people to think like, I mean, obviously, if one time, if you miss a pill, you know, you don't need to go to the hospital or go into a detox facility, but don't ever do it again, period. Because your brain now is not protected, and your brain gets a taste of the alcohol without the naltrexone blocking those specific endorphins from it. Your brain's going to start going, "Wah!" And that monster, imagine that dragon coming alive in your brain. He's getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and now it's making those same demands from you, which is have more, more, more. And that's what it felt like. I mean, I could see it, and I can
Yeah.
see it from hindsight now. I could see how beautiful my progression was towards extinction. I mean, I literally reached extinction within early, like 4 months.
Wow.
I mean, because I went, by the time I realized that I wasn't thinking about alcohol, I just wasn't thinking about it anymore. That to me was extinction.
Yeah.
People's view of extinction is different. Mine is that no aspect of alcohol, meaning cravings or thoughts about alcohol or desire for alcohol, ruled my day. That's when I felt like I've reached extinction, because I was back to normal. Now, that doesn't mean that maybe if I said, oh, I'm getting together with, I'm going on a date, for instance, that doesn't mean that I wouldn't think, oh, we're going to such and such restaurant, maybe I'll have a glass of wine. Well, that's a different thought process than, oh, I need to have a glass of wine, or I want to have a glass of wine. That's called preparing for the evening. So I spent many years doing that, asking myself, would I like to drink tonight? And that wasn't that I was craving right that minute. It's 4 p.m. I'm asking
Yeah.
myself at 4 p.m., am I going to drink
You're not
tonight?
opening the bottle before dinner to start
No,
drinking.
because I had to plan, and I had to say, no, you know what, tonight's going to be a non-drinking night, so I won't take my pill. And then sometimes when I didn't know how I was going to feel, I would pop it anyway, because at this point it didn't change anything physiologically in my body. It was like it sat in the back of my brain. So it was sort of like popping an aspirin when you think you might get a headache, you know. So I would, you know, if I was going to a friend's house and I just didn't know, but I didn't want to have to think about it, and I wanted to be prepared, I would pop an Naltrexone. And, you know, if I would go there and then I would notice that maybe we don't want to drink, I would ask them and say, well, do you have just a tiny bit of alcohol that I could just drink a little bit so that I get a session in, basically. So even then I kind of knew instinctually, because we, you know, once again, there were no peer support groups or Facebook sites, or there wasn't really any C3 Foundation. So I kind of instinctually knew that maybe if I took a little bit of alcohol, that would be fine. I was also in communications with Dr. Escapa back then, and Dr. Sinclair. So anytime I had a question, once I established relationships with them, that I could email with them, that was, you know, a couple years into TSM. I was really fortunate, because any questions that arose, I could ask them. So that was really helpful. I could ask, and then Dr. Sinclair told me, he said, you know, you're really safe for 10 hours. That's what he used to. So that to me was that, and that never really was an issue for me, because I never drank for 10 hours.
Yeah.
But if I and I really avoided daytime drinking, because I thought, if I'm going to drink on the tablet, it's going to be at night. I don't want to have to worry that I'm going to take one for a lunchtime drink and then worry about that. That was, once again, instinctually, because we didn't know about metabolism wearing off, you know, for some individuals who have a high metabolism, or youth, you know, a lot of young people at that point. I was, you know, obviously not as old as I am now. and so potentially I would have been burning off the medication a little quicker than normally.
I want to go back to also when you're talking about the 7-year relapse, because it wasn't just like, oh, I forgot my pill and I'm going to drink. It's like there was definitely a coping mechanism aspect to it too, I think, which is really interesting, because it wasn't just you, you know, socially having a drink. It was like relying on old coping mechanisms. And
Yes.
I see people do that now, you know, where they might comply, but they're still drinking to cope with something stressful in their life or otherwise. And maybe they fight the medication a bit, or it's not as effective as it could be. So I wondered if you wanted to speak to that piece, you know, the difference between not drinking on naltrexone when you're totally like in disarray and it's for coping versus, oops, I just forgot to take the medication. And
it's a massive, massive difference. And you're absolutely right to point that out. Once again, I go back to my inaccurate belief that addiction was strictly biological with me. So that's what led to that. When you look at it now, of course, you and I can look back and say, well, that was strictly an emotional crutch. That was Claudia using alcohol as a coping mechanism because she hadn't learned how not to. So I can see that now because I've done the work, but at the time, nobody was talking about tools, and I that wasn't part of my life, was taking the time to actually work on different ways of handling stress. And because I also said, that particular time in my life, I was working so hard for free for other people that I had even eliminated working out. I wasn't doing my regular workouts. I wasn't taking my self-care that I normally did instinctually my whole life. I wasn't eating right, which I'm like a clean food freak, but I wasn't doing that. I was not caring for myself at all in that period of my life. So it was a snowball effect. It was definitely a combination of all of those things. And yes, had I had a therapist that was actually good, as opposed to the one that I had for those 3 years prior to that, that binge, that non-compliance event, had I had someone who taught me tools, I think I probably would have coped with that in a much better way. Also, had I had someone I could trust in my life that I could have called and said, I'm scared, or I'm hurt, or, this just happened to me. But I didn't even have anyone I could talk to at that point in my life. So yes, it was a perfect storm. It really was. And I do encourage people to learn how to use alcohol. How not to use alcohol as a coping mechanism, and to take that brief moment. You and I talk all the time about mindfulness. There was no mindfulness whatsoever in that act. None. Had I simply sat down and absorbed the pain of losing this beloved mentor, this father-like figure to me, had I sat there and had I just said, I'm not going to go to the convention. I'm not going to put myself out there. I'm just going to sit here in this hotel room, and I'm going to call a good friend or a family member, or I'm going to cry, whatever. I'm going to order a nice meal or something, whatever, or I'm going to go for a walk. I'm going to get the hell out of here and go in nature and just walk it off, whatever. But no, I did what was conditioned and ingrained in me, which was, let me numb myself now. Let me forget about my pain in the only ways that I know how, because I didn't know any other way, obviously. It never occurred to me to do all the things I tell people I coach now to go, never occurred to me to do what I preach in essence now, because nobody preached that to me. I didn't have an addiction coach. I didn't have somebody who had been through this. There was no mentor, TSM mentor for me. This was all new roads. Dr. Escapa could say to me, never drink without the medication, but okay, well, what happens when Dr. Sinclair dies? What happens when I speak to him 10 minutes before he dies? What do I do then? These are all new things that occurred, that happened in life. You can tell yourself you're mentally prepared for someone to die, or a divorce to happen, or for you to lose your home. You can say all you want, I'm strong, I can handle it. But if you've been using alcohol as a coping mechanism, for so long in your life, as a knee-jerk response, then you might fall into that. And that's why it is important for people to learn new tools and ways of handling these real life incidents that happen, and also the small things in life that happen. You could just be, having a bad day, and what do people do? They immediately say, oh, I need to have a drink when I get home. Well, why? How is that going to help you? Really, honestly, think it through. I know it sounds like it's a good idea because you think you'll relax, but once the alcohol wears off and the cortisol kicks in and the anxiety happens again, and then you go, oh, I'm going to have another drink, and then another drink, another drink. Then you wake up the next morning dehydrated and feeling like crap because you're hungover. It's a vicious circle. So, but once again, you don't know that there are other coping mechanisms unless someone teaches you, or unless you research on your own. And it's hard, once again, human beings are fallible. If something is easy, it's like a piece of cake makes me feel good. Okay, well, I'm going to have that piece of cake. Well, guess what? Doing 40 minutes of cardio makes you feel good too. You know, so does a healthy meal. So does taking a walk with a friend. So does calling someone and laughing. All of these things make you feel good. But, you know, and if you don't know that the rest of those things feel good, you're going to go to the piece of cake,
Yeah.
or the drink. So it's really about exploring more and taking more chances and adding more activities into your life that could bring you joy and that will bring you joy. And that's why I always tell people during this process of being on the Sinclair Method, it's so important to add these new experiences into your life, new joy, new levity, new laughs, new people, new experiences, so that the more you do that, the more rich and full your life becomes, the less and less important alcohol is. And it's so far off in the background that you'll get to the day finally where you say, God, I haven't even had a drink in a month and I haven't been thinking about it, because I'm
Exactly.
busy and I'm happy and I'm excited about life and I'm doing things that don't require drinking. I'm surfing instead, or I'm, you know, I'm hiking, I'm camping, I'm doing stuff, you know, and also that association with alcohol. You don't have to have a book club meeting with wine. I know we see it in the movies that every woman always has to have a glass of wine in her
There is
hand.
so much alcohol in movies.
There's
That's like,
so
I've
much
noticed
alcohol
it
in
so
movies.
much.
I was watching this movie with a bunch of, you know, older women in it called The Book Club, and I was disgusted. It was like they could not get together. They didn't have one time when they had a coffee or a cup of tea
Yeah.
or a glass of water, or just didn't drink anything.
And you
Every
know,
single scene they were drinking wine.
I
Every
notice
single
it so
scene.
much more in like because I've been watching like 70s and 80s movies lately, and it's not nearly as much in those as it is more recent years.
Yes.
I'm like, this is a really interesting
It,
propaganda. No, I
you're
don't know.
right. No, yeah, well, it is prolific. It's amazing. And it's always so many women. You know, you don't see a bunch of guys. You can see guys sitting around maybe drinking beer or doing a shot, but with women, it's copious amounts of wine,
Yeah.
wine. And, you know, look at all these wine companies that have geared their particular brands to women,
Yep.
you know, and
And the increase with women with AUD has increased over 80% over the
yeah,
last 10 years or
isn't that
so.
yeah,
Yeah.
all of the
It's
yes,
not,
the cases have escalated like crazy.
yeah.
And yeah, it's really scary. It's it's not a good coping mechanism for women, especially I see women in middle age, when you know, so many women put on 5 to 10 pounds every year, um, regardless of not changing their good eating habits. You know, they're still eating the same and working out the same, but they start putting on weight. Well, guess what? The alcohol is not going to help that at all. And
Exactly.
then it's a self-esteem issue and a self-love issue, and then it trickles down into everything else. I mean, and plus alcohol affects you more adversely the older you get, period.
Yeah.
But it's also shouldn't be a coping mechanism for a 20-year-old with a child, or a 30-year-old with 2 kids, or you know, a 30-year-old who's just starting, you know, at their job that they're so excited about. You know, they get a new opportunity. They don't you know, it's this pressure to go out and have fun.
Yeah.
Well, when are we going to understand that? I mean, honestly, I think I'm having more fun in my life now that I have that disassociation from alcohol than I've ever had in my life, because
Yeah.
there's no drama. Even in my 20s, when I was drinking normally, there was always some jerk at a party that had too much to drink. It wasn't me, thank God, in those days, but there was always some girl who was jealous because some guy looked at you, and it all was alcohol based. You know, all of these heightened emotions and ridiculous fights and arguments never would have happened. And the guy wouldn't have made a pass at somebody had he not had 10 drinks. And the woman wouldn't have flirted with your husband had she not had 6 drinks. You know, it's like every bad thing that happened, if I look back on it now, including car accidents, teenage years and stuff, kids drunk driving, all of it had to do with alcohol.
Yeah. And I want to like highlight something you were talking about too with regards to your 7-year the relapse that happened at 7 years, and you know, really highlight that I feel like a sense of radical self-care needs to go alongside this method. And I know in Ria's program the coaches talk a lot about self-care and really taking care of yourself, because if you get to the point where you're so depleted, whether it's from one day at work or like you, like months and months of buildup of just giving and not really checking back in with yourself and meeting your own needs, whether that's a nap or a rest for 5 minutes, or, just checking in with yourself all day long. When you're that depleted, you're always going to be looking outside for something else just to escape that discomfort. And so, in combination with, yes, like healing the reasons why we're drinking and the reasons why we cope with alcohol and finding new hobbies, it's about really learning to take care of yourself again in a way that's like radical, meaning you do it all day, every day. You're just taking care of yourself moment to moment, because if we're not doing that, that's where the acronym, what is it? HALT: hungry, angry, lonely, tired. If we start to have any of those be too prominent in our life, it's so easy to just say, oh, screw it, I'm going to have a drink, or I'm not going to comply, or whatever. But just wanted to highlight that from my personal experience with naltrexone. Like, that became the forefront for me. Like, if I wasn't taking really good care of myself, then I noticed I would drink more and do other destructive things as well.
Yeah, and I do want, and I totally agree. And I had I even known what HALT was back then, I probably could have. Well, and I would have been mindful enough to stop and say, am I hungry or angry? Why am I angry? I mean, I do that now naturally, but then once again, I wasn't as evolved or experienced or knowledgeable.
Well, you've been drinking heavily for a long time. I mean, it's so we're not practiced in that, and I think a lot of people are in that space right now where we're just out of practice with checking in with ourselves, where we just drink automatically. So yeah, I appreciate you and sharing your experience and raising awareness to that.
Another thing I want to bring up is that I've spoken to many people who they are 100% compliant and they are trying to be mindful, but then they will really panic because they've had an evening where they had too much to drink. I was coaching somebody who was on this for 3 years and everything was perfect. He had the perfect, drink decrease and keeping drink log every week for 3 years. I mean, and then, rolled around and he had a really heavy drinking day and then another one. But one of these drinking days was because he started earlier in the day, it was a holiday. And another one was while he was traveling. And some things are in our life were events, that we drank a lot traditionally. A lot of people do drink a lot on airplanes, that they're doing a long trek to Europe. They're going to get wasted till they fall asleep. And a lot of people, even though they were still complying, they hadn't changed that habit. They hadn't worked on finding different things to do in the plane, saying to yourself, even, okay, I'm going to watch 2 movies and then I'll take the tablet and I'll have some wine later on. Okay. Or I'm going to, just switching things up as opposed to taking the tablet, getting on the airplane and starting to pound drinks the second you're on the plane. Saying to yourself, okay, I'm going to go on holiday and I really want to have the freedom to drink during the day. Okay. But why not say, 2 of those days you're going to explore where you are and you're not going to drink during the day. I mean, it's all about making conscious decisions and choices. But if you do have an evening where you're in Barcelona, not now, of course, coronavirus, but where you're in Spain and you're having a great time and you're partying and suddenly, it's 4:00 in the morning and you've had 7 drinks, but you haven't had 7 drinks in 2 years on TSM in one night. You haven't had 7 drinks in one night forever. You even did a shot, doesn't mean that that it's over and that it's not working anymore. It just means that was an anomaly. It was an event. It was a party. And once again, we always talk about this. Ask yourself, before the addiction crept in, did you ever have an evening or a day when you overdrank? Was it New Year's Eve, Halloween, whatever? So it's all about really looking at it, saying, okay, I definitely complied. I'm not trying to drink through the medication. I was just having a good time. And I had more drinks than I normally would. That's fine. As long as it doesn't spiral into a binge or you didn't continue drinking the next day, hair of the dog, all that kind of stuff, then it's okay. But once again, it starts with compliance.
Yeah. And it's like lesson learned. We're like, okay, now I know next time I'm on a plane, like, just like you were saying, okay, maybe I need to make some planning around it where I'm not going to start drinking right away or things like that.
It's also the element of the freedom of it. That's the thing, is people are so blown away by the fact that they can drink. I have people who've been in AA for 7 years that suddenly try TSM because they're dying from the cravings. They're white knuckling every day. This is not the life that they want to live. I had one young lady who said, I'd rather die than have to go to an AA meeting every single day because I can't stop thinking about alcohol. That's not that wasn't her. She wasn't comfortable in her own skin. So when she went on TSM, it was like, woohoo, you know, and of course the first few months she was taking full advantage of the fact that she was allowed to drink. But see, that's, you have to differentiate between, okay, yes, you drink on this method, but that is not a free ticket to go out and do exactly what you used to do pre-TSM or pre-AA. You have to change your relationship to alcohol. And that's the big thing that we try and explain this to people, is it cannot be something that you immediately jump into because you're uncomfortable. It cannot be something you use to self-medicate when you're in pain. It cannot be something you use to black out because you're unhappy. That's not a healthy way of using alcohol. You know, if it's a social situation and you're having a good time and oops, I had 4 glasses of wine when I really only intended to have 2, okay, that's fine. If it's, oh, I had a crappy day at work because that fellow said something mean to me and now I'm going to drink 2 bottles of wine, but I'll take my pill. You're using alcohol to self-medicate. And you need to really look at that. And it's great that you complied, but you also have to look at what you were using the alcohol for.
Absolutely. That's such an important point. Claudia, is there anything else before we wrap up that you kind of want to share with us based on your wisdom and experience of, you know, a decade having known about the Sinclair method and practiced it yourself, having relapses, having successes, just any kind of like final words of wisdom for folks out there?
Well, first of all, I want to really say again that I don't know if I'd even be here without the Sinclair method. That medication saved my life. And I never wanted to be on a medication. I always thought that it would have been a failure on my part to not be able to quit drinking on my own. I felt ashamed to have to resort to a medication. And my opinion on that has changed so wildly because I want to save people those years of suffering. And I think that if a medication can bring you to a place where you want to be sooner than trying to every other aspect, you know, any other way, like I did, hypnosis, therapy, blah, 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 AA, rehab. If a medication can help you get to a place where you can control your drinking or decrease it or even stop your drinking, then you're in a position to work on yourself and the reason and the motivation why you drank. And that's so important. And that's a step that I really missed in my journey. So I'm super happy that people now have the experience of all these people like me who have this decade of experience. Looking back, my hindsight is here to help others. And I'm really, really grateful that I have this experience, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I'm grateful for it because now I can say to somebody, this is where I went wrong, or this is what I should have done, and this is what I should have added to the mix. And this is once again why a comprehensive program like Ria has is so important, because you're really dealing with mind, body, and soul, the biological aspect of addiction, but also the emotional aspects of addiction and alcohol misuse. So I think that had these programs been around in 2009 when I started, I would have done it, and I probably never would have had the little bits of lack of compliance in year 4, and certainly not the grand Poobah binge in year 7. But then again, you know, I wouldn't know what I know now. So I implore other people that are trying this to really get a comprehensive program. It's so important to not just pop the pill and hope for the best.